All right, everyone, welcome back. Today we're taking a deep dive into a story that's been making headlines for all the wrong reasons. It's the legal saga surrounding none other than Sean Diddy Combs.
And this one's a doozy. We're not just talking about a single lawsuit or a minor legal hiccup. Diddy's facing a barrage of accusations, both criminal and civil, that span decades.
Yeah, it's a lot to unpack. We're talking over 24 civil lawsuits, and on top of that, some very serious criminal charges.
It's enough to make anyone's head spin. And to make things even more interesting, he's currently sharing jail space with Sam Bankman-Fried at MDC Brooklyn.
Oh, wow, talk about a strange twist of fate. So where do we even begin with a story this complex? I think the best place to start is with Diddy's arrest back on September 16th. He was hit with some pretty hefty charges, including racketeering conspiracy
Oh yeah, that one's serious. And then you got sex trafficking by force.
and transportation for purposes of prostitution. When I first heard about these charges, I have to admit I was floored.
It definitely throws a wrench into Diddy's carefully crafted image as a music mogul and entrepreneur.
For sure. So before we get into the specifics of the civil lawsuits, can you break down what racketeering actually means in this context? It sounds like something straight out of a mob movie.
Well, it's not that far off, actually. In this case, the prosecution is alleging that Diddy was essentially running a criminal enterprise. They're saying he wasn't just involved in these alleged crimes as an individual, but that he was orchestrating and profiting from them as part of a larger operation.
Wow, so they're saying he was the head honcho, the big boss behind it all.
Exactly. And they're claiming that this enterprise involved all sorts of illegal activities. Like, for instance, they're pointing to these parties Diddy used to throw called freak-offs. Now, on the surface, they might sound like just your typical wild celebrity bash.
Right, lots of music, dancing, that sort of thing.
But the prosecution is alleging that these freak-offs were actually a lot more sinister than that. They're claiming they were part of a system of coercion and exploitation. And that's not all.
What else is the prosecution alleging?
They're saying Diddy and his associates used drugs, violence, and threats to keep everything under wraps, to silence anyone who might try to speak out. And they've got some evidence to back up these claims.
Like what kind of evidence?
Well, during raids on Diddy's properties, they found guns, ammunition, and a truly baffling amount of lubricant.
Lubricant? Wait, how much are we talking about?
Over 1,000 bottles.
1,000? That's a lot of lubricant. Okay, so we've got the criminal charges laid out, and they're pretty heavy, but what about Diddy's response to all of this? How's he pleading?
He's entered a plea of not guilty to all charges.
So he's fighting this thing tooth and nail.
Oh, absolutely. But that doesn't mean he's off the hook. He's currently being held at MDC Brooklyn without bail.
Wow, no bail. So what happens next?
Well, if he's convicted, he could be facing anywhere from 15 years to life behind bars. The stakes are incredibly high right now.
It's a lot to process, but I think before we dive deeper into the specifics of each case, we should talk about Cassie Ventura. She's a key figure in all of this, not just because of her long-term relationship with Diddy.
She was his girlfriend on and off for years, right?
Right, but also because she's the one who really blew the lid off this whole thing. She was the first to publicly accuse Diddy of abuse and filed a lawsuit last November.
Her lawsuit painted a pretty grim picture. She claimed that Diddy trapped her in a cycle of violence and abuse during their relationship. She even alleged that he was involved in sex trafficking.
Yeah, those are some very serious allegations. Didn't that lawsuit end up getting settled, though?
It did, yeah, relatively quickly.
Hmm.
But shortly after the settlement, CNN got their hands on some surveillance footage from 2016 that showed Diddy physically assaulting Ventura.
Oh, wow. I remember that. It was all over the news.
It was a bombshell. It basically forced Diddy to come out and publicly acknowledge the incident. He ended up issuing an apology on Instagram.
It's amazing how much power a single piece of video evidence can have. It completely shifted the narrative, and it seemed to open the floodgates.
You could say that again. After Ventura went public, at least 27 other individuals have come forward with their own allegations against Diddy.
So it's not just one story, it's a whole chorus of voices now.
And each one adds another layer to this already complicated case. It's important to note, though, that these new allegations aren't part of the criminal case.
So they're separate civil lawsuits.
Exactly. Each one tells a different story, but they all paint a pretty disturbing picture of Diddy's alleged behavior.
So let's dive into some of these individual cases, especially the ones that have really grabbed headlines because of their particularly shocking details. I'm thinking of someone like Joy Dickerson-Neal, who alleges that Diddy drugged and raped her back in 1991.
She was a student at Syracuse University at the time.
And she even claims he filmed the assault and showed it to other people,
Yeah.
essentially accusing him of creating and distributing revenge porn.
Then there's Liza Gardner, who alleges that she was forced into having sex with Diddy and Aaron Hall when she was only 16 years old. She also claims that Diddy assaulted her the next day, choking her until she lost consciousness.
It's horrifying to think about. And sadly, the stories just keep coming. We've got Jane Doe, who claims she was a victim of gang rape. She alleges that Diddy, Harve Pierre, and another individual assaulted her when she was a 17-year-old high school student.
And then you've got Rodney Little Rod Jones.
He's the producer and videographer who worked on Diddy's latest album, right?
That's right. His allegations bring a whole new dimension to this story. He claims Diddy forced him to get drugs and find sex workers. He even alleges that both Diddy and actor Cuba Gooding Jr. groped him without his consent.
Wait a minute, Cuba Gooding Jr. is involved in this too?
According to Jones's allegations, yes.
Hmm.
And then we have Grace Omar Kai. She worked on a yacht leased by the Combs family, and her allegations target both Diddy and his son, Christian King Combs.
So now Diddy's son is being dragged into this as well.
It certainly seems that way. Omar Kai accuses them both of sexual assault and describes a pretty wild atmosphere on that yacht, suggesting that it was basically a breeding ground for this kind of behavior.
It's like every new allegation just makes this whole thing more and more complicated, and they just keep coming. You've got April Lampros, who details 4 alleged sexual encounters with Diddy spanning from the 1990s to the early 2000s. And then there's Thalia Graves, who claims that Diddy and his bodyguard drugged and raped her and then recorded and distributed the assault.
And as if that wasn't enough, on October 14th, 6 anonymous accusers filed lawsuits. One woman alleges rape, and another accuses Diddy of ordering a 16-year-old boy to undress in front of him. And then, just a day later, Ashley Parham filed a lawsuit alleging Diddy raped her as payback for suggesting he was involved in the unsolved murder of Tupac Shakur.
Hold on, Tupac Shakur, as in the legendary rapper Tupac Shakur.
The one and only. Parham's claiming that Diddy assaulted her as a way of getting back at her for implying he might have been involved in Tupac's murder, which, as we all know, is still an unsolved mystery to this day.
It's like every time we think we've reached the bottom of this rabbit hole, it just keeps getting deeper and darker. So with all of these accusations flying around, how is Diddy's legal team even responding to all of this?
Well, so far, their strategy has been pretty straightforward. Deny, deny, deny. They're calling the lawsuits a money grab and a tale of fiction.
So basically they're saying all of these accusers are lying.
Pretty much. They're claiming that the lawsuits are baseless and clear attempts to garner publicity. They've also been arguing that some of the lawsuits are time-barred, meaning they were filed too long after the alleged incidents to be admissible in court.
So they're pulling out all the stops to try and discredit these accusations and protect their client. It's a classic legal strategy. But the question is, will it be enough to counter the sheer number and seriousness of these allegations?
That's the million-dollar question, isn't it? It'll be interesting to see how this all plays out. It's kind of wild, right? How so many of these incidents are tied to parties that Diddy hosted. Makes you wonder what was really going on in those environments, you know?
It's a recurring theme, isn't it? These parties as the backdrop for these alleged incidents. It definitely raises questions about the culture surrounding Diddy and whether there was a sense of, I don't know, enabling going on.
Yeah, like people turning a blind eye or even actively participating in creating a situation where these kinds of things could happen. And we can't forget the repeated allegations of drugs and alcohol being involved, too.
Yeah.
Some accusers are claiming they were basically incapacitated, making them more vulnerable to these kinds of assaults.
That adds another layer of complexity, doesn't it? The potential use of substances to, well, take advantage of people. It's a disturbing thought.
Absolutely. And it makes you wonder about the people around Diddy, his entourage, his inner circle. What did they know? Were they complicit? Or did they just willfully ignore the warning signs? Some lawsuits even name specific individuals, claiming they were directly involved in the assaults or in covering them up.
It's like this whole thing is a tangled web with Diddy at the center and all these relationships and connections radiating outward. It's hard not to think about how his wealth and influence might have played a role in potentially shielding him from consequences for so long.
It's the elephant in the room, right? Did his fame and fortune create a sense of invincibility, a belief that he was above the law? Did he use settlements and legal maneuvers to silence accusers and avoid real accountability?
Those are tough questions, but they're important ones to ask. And it seems like things might be changing. The sheer number of accusations, the consistency of their stories, that surveillance footage of the incident with Cassie Ventura, is all making it harder and harder for Diddy to maintain his blanket denials.
And let's not forget the impact of the hashtag #MeToo movement. It's created a space where victims feel more empowered to come forward to share their stories, even when they're accusing someone as powerful as Diddy.
It's a reminder that no one is above the law, no matter how rich or famous they are. So, with all of this in mind, what do you think the ultimate consequences will be for Diddy?
Honestly, it's impossible to say for sure. The legal process can be unpredictable, and there's so many moving parts to this case. Will he face criminal prosecution? Will he be able to settle these lawsuits and avoid jail time? It's all up in the air right now.
One thing's for sure, though, right? His carefully constructed public image has taken a major hit.
Oh, absolutely. Whether he's found guilty in a court of law or not, the court of public opinion has already delivered a pretty harsh verdict.
Yeah, it's hard to see how he comes back from this unscathed. These accusations have tarnished his legacy.
It's a reminder that power and wealth don't excuse harmful behavior, and the consequences can be far-reaching. And it's a reminder of how important it is to listen to and believe victims. For too long, powerful men have been able to get away with abuse and exploitation. The hashtag #MeToo movement is changing that.
It's a powerful cultural shift, and this case feels like a real turning point. Do you think we'll see real, lasting change in the entertainment industry as a result of all of this? Will there be more accountability for those who use their power?
I hope so. I think these conversations are essential. We have to keep asking these tough questions, keep pushing for change.
We've covered a lot of ground today, and it's been heavy stuff. We've talked about disturbing allegations spanning decades, the potential misuse of power and influence, and the long, difficult road to justice for survivors of abuse.
It's a complex and unsettling story, but it's one that needs to be told. We have to keep talking about these issues, keep shining a light on them.
Well said. Now, before we wrap things up, there's one more layer to this story we need to explore. It takes us even deeper into the legal strategies being used in this case. So we've been focusing on some pretty heavy allegations against Diddy, and, there are a few more cases that I think really highlight the patterns we've been talking about.
Yeah, absolutely. Some of these stories are, well, they're particularly disturbing. Like, for example, there's Crystal McKinney. She's claiming that Diddy drugged and sexually assaulted her back in 2003 after a men's Fashion Week event.
And what's really striking about her case is that she was only 22 at the time.
Exactly. Just underscores the power imbalance we've been discussing. And then you've got the testimony of Dawn Richards. She was a member of Diddy's girl groups, Danity Kane and Diddy Dirty Money.
Oh, right. I remember her.
So her account goes beyond just personal allegations.
Mm.
She's actually claiming that she witnessed Diddy being violent towards Cassie Ventura.
Oh, wow. Firsthand.
Yeah, she says she saw it with her own eyes. And she even alleges that Diddy threatened her when she tried to intervene.
That's pretty damning stuff. It makes you wonder how many other people knew about this alleged behavior and just stayed silent.
The question a lot of people are asking. And then there's Adria English. She's a former adult film actress who worked with Diddy back in the 2000s. Her allegations are, well, they paint a pretty graphic picture.
Yeah, I read her lawsuit. It's intense. She's claiming that he basically used her as, a sexual pawn for his own gratification and to entertain others.
Tough story to hear.
It is. But it's important to acknowledge the courage it takes for these individuals to come forward, especially when they're accusing someone as powerful as Diddy.
Absolutely. They're challenging a system that has often protected abusers and silenced victims. It's a big deal. But let's shift gears for a second and talk about how Diddy and his legal team are handling all of this. What's their strategy for fighting these accusations?
Well, from what we've seen so far, it seems like they're taking a pretty aggressive approach, wouldn't you say?
Oh, yeah, definitely. They're pulling out all the stops.
Oh.
They've been very consistent in denying every single allegation. They're calling the lawsuits money grabs and saying it's all just a bunch of people trying to get their 15 minutes of fame.
Right, the classic, they're just in it for the money defense.
Exactly. And they've also been trying to get some of the cases dismissed on technicalities. Arguing that they're time barred because of statutes of limitations or that there isn't enough evidence.
So it's the classic legal playbook. Deny, delay, discredit. But the question is, will it work? With so many accusers telling similar stories, it's hard to imagine Diddy coming out of this unscathed.
Yeah, it's a tough road ahead for him, for sure.
Yeah.
We've got the criminal case still pending, and these civil lawsuits could drag on for years, costing him a fortune in legal fees and potential settlements. And even if he manages to avoid a guilty verdict or jail time, his reputation has already taken a major hit.
It's a pretty dramatic fall from grace for someone who was once considered a hip-hop icon and a successful entrepreneur. Now he's facing the potential ruin of his career and a legacy that will forever be tarnished by these accusations.
It's a reminder that no amount of fame or wealth can protect you from the consequences of your actions. And this whole situation really highlights the broader themes of the #MeToo movement. The pervasiveness of abuse, the power dynamics at play, and the long and difficult fight for justice that so many survivors face.
It's a story that forces us to confront some uncomfortable truths about our society.
And to ask some tough questions about what real accountability looks like.
Yeah, is it enough for someone in Diddy's position to simply deny the allegations and fight them in court? Or is there a moral obligation to do more? Will he take responsibility for his actions? Will he apologize to the people he's hurt? Will he use his platform to advocate for change and support survivors?
Those are the questions that will ultimately define his legacy.
It's a lot to think about.
It is. And as we wrap up this deep dive, we encourage you to keep engaging with this story. Read the accounts of the accusers, follow the legal proceedings, and have those difficult conversations about power, abuse, and accountability. This isn't just about Diddy. It's about creating a culture where these issues are taken seriously, where survivors are believed and supported, and where abusers are held responsible for their actions.
Well said. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive, everyone. It's been a heavy one, but I think it's an important conversation to have.